In this video, we're going to be looking at cleaning data and standardizing data. We're going to be looking at two tools, Workbench, an online tool, and also OpenRefine. I'm going to start with Workbench. So the goal of cleaning and standardizing data is that we want to make sure all of our values are basically are good. We want to catch anything that might have been a typo if the data was entered by a human. We want to try to catch any errors that might have been created through our processing of the data. And we also just want to catch any values that might not make sense. Okay, so I'm going to go through this kind of column by column, taking a look at the different kinds of errors that we might have. So the first thing that we might want to do is, let's start with this value column. So this is the value of different apartment complexes. And a really basic way to start cleaning text columns is just to sort them and think about whether all of our values make sense. So if I'm thinking about property values, I'm going to be looking at values that might be too high and values that might be too low. Otherwise, I don't really have a way to know whether the value is right. So if I sort this column, I can look and see, okay, do these values make sense? And I can see, okay, this is an apartment. It is somewhere on the freeway, and 520 does not make any sense for the appraised value of this apartment. So what I would want to do here is, there's no way to automatically fix this. I don't know whether it's supposed to be 520,000 or 52,000 or 5 million. Those are all reasonable values for apartments. So what I would want to do here is trace this back to a document and see whether that document has the correct value, and then I would want to keep tracing it if I'm unable to figure out the correct value here. Here, 27,000, 51,000, these seem pretty low to me, but it's also possible that those are the values of maybe a really small, really old complex. So again, these I might just triple check the documents. So that was sorting small to large. If I sort large to small, just to make sure all my values make sense. 43 million here. I know that this is a really large complex. That's probably correct. 42 million. These numbers are all looking in a really similar range to me. So none of that looks off to me. Another thing that we might want to do is think about columns like the state, where the owner lives. And these are categorical variables, so there's only 50 values that I would expect this column to have. And one way we can start thinking about this is if we go add step and we come down to refine, and I'm going to tell it I want to refine the owner state column. So what it's going to do is it's going to split out all of the values, the possible values here. And I can then sort these by the number of occurrences. And this is just a useful way for me to think about whether this makes sense or not. So Texas and California, this makes sense. But what I might be looking for is a typo on one of these, and if there's a typo, I would expect it to have very few values. So if I look here, I'm seeing there's only one C. So I might want to look at this row and see whether from the state, from the city, I can tell if it's California or Connecticut. And then again, I might want to trace back. If I decide that that's definitely California, what I can do is merge these facets. And we can make sure that that worked. I'll just sort it really quickly. and make sure that I don't have a C value there, which I don't. So that is one way of using the refine tool, just to look for oddities and check and make sure that those oddities seem okay. Another way that we might use the refine tool is to look for typos. So owner city, I'm not going to necessarily want to sort that by the number of occurrences, just because there's so many cities and there will be just a lot that only occur once. But if I, again, add a refine step, and I'm going to select owner city here, there is a feature here called find clusters. And what clusters is doing is it's looking for things that are similar but are not quite the same. So basically typos, okay? So here where it says method, there are multiple methods of looking for what's similar. And so using this first method, it said, okay, I think these two are similar. There's 26 rows that are capital San Marcos. There's one that's lowercase. And we'll make this uppercase San Marcos. And if I click merge selected, it's going to standardize those. I can then find clusters again. So with fingerprint, no clusters are found because we fixed that. But if I go to edit distance, this is now looking for basically the number of characters I would have to change to make these the same. So Austin and Houston, obviously those are not the same. We want to keep those distinct. Los Angeles, Los Angeles, I might check into, but I think that's probably a typo. I'm not sure if there is a Los Angeles. It seems like the gender is at least wrong. Orlando and Warland, I think, are probably different cities. And Shreveport and Shreveport, this is a really great example of a typo. So I can merge selected there. And I've now fixed my typos in a column. So the last thing I want to look at is something like this address field. And this field, I don't necessarily want to look for typos and things because I expect this number to be different for most of them, and that kind of messes it up. But something we might want to do is split a column into multiple columns. So I might want to split this column so that I can look at zip codes if we had multiple zip codes. So if I come here to add step, I can come and split column. So I'm going to split the address visible column, split on a delimiter. So delimiter is basically a character, sequence of characters that are going to be what we split on. So I'm going to split on a comma here, and that should give me what I'm looking for. Okay, so now I have the street address, the city, and here I have state and zip code. So if I wanted to keep splitting these out, I could split again. And this time I could do delimiter as a space. I could also do characters from the left and choose 3 and run that. And now I'm going to have, oh, I forgot to select my column. So I'm on address visible 3. And I now have state and zip code, and I could rename these if I want to. The last thing I'll show you is not terribly useful, but right here I said 3, so there should be, maybe there's not. If you ever need to, I'll just run through this really quick. The step that is actually clean text, what it's going to do, let's try it, this one, is do things like trim spaces around value. So if there were extra spaces here, it would remove them. You can also remove all spaces if you just want something that has no spaces and to make sure it has no spaces. You could also, for example, delete all of the numbers. So in this column, I could delete all of the numbers and spaces, and that should leave me with, well, it would be one way to maybe isolate the street name if you wanted that for some reason. Obviously, the problem there is if we have something like First Street or Loop 82 or I-35, we're going to run into issues. So some of the cleaning challenges have to be dealt with in different ways. So that's cleaning in Workbench. So in Workbench, I might have one tab that's my cleaning, and then I might have another tab where I import from that tab. And now in this tab, all of a sudden I have clean data to start working with, and I have a record of everything that I had to do to clean that data. So the last thing I want to look at is OpenRefine. OpenRefine is free software. It was originally made by Google. And the times that you would want to use OpenRefine over Workbench are if you need a little bit more flexibility. There's a few more things that it can do. And then the biggest thing is Refine is made for working with really large scale data. So if you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of rows or even thousands of rows, Refine might be a good choice. So we'll look at it really quickly. All right, so Refine, it's software. You download it, you install it. It's free, and it opens in the browser and runs like this. The first thing it's going to do is preview your data for you. It's got a lot of options for opening different kinds of data files. Refine is very much professional level software. So when we're in Refine, it's not going to show me all of my rows. Okay, so here it's saying I'm just going to show you 10 rows, and you've got 138 total. So Refine is kind of built around the idea that we're doing things to a lot of rows at a time, and we're not going to look at 100,000 rows because that's just going to it's going to take too much time. It's going to bog down the computer. We don't want to do that. So let's see, what could we do here? Refine uses facets as kind of a concept. And remember I've said before, facets is like categories. So I do facet, text facet. What it's going to do over here is the same thing that we looked at in Workbench, where it's going to separate it out and show me count. So here I've got C. I think this is wrong. Let's pretend that I know this is California. I can edit and say, okay, we're going to do CA and apply, and that's going to apply to all the columns that that match, even though maybe I can't see them. Let's see, what else could we do? We can sort just like we did before and see what are the highest and what are the lowest values here. Except for it looks like I need to tell it that this is a number because it sorted this alphabetically. So now if I sort from sorted as numbers, smallest first, this is going to bring up that 520 that we looked at before. Zip, so this is another example of somewhere where you might want to split a column. Edit column, split into several columns by separator. So before it said delimiter, here we'll use separator. It's the same meaning, and we now have the first part of the zip code, the second part of the zip code. We don't ever really use that second part, so I might delete that column if I wanted to. All right, we looked at this one. Owner city, this is the one that we used the refine function in Workbench for. The way that we do here is we're going to create a text facet. Okay, so we already did this. And then we're going to cluster. And Workbench is actually either using refine or using exactly the words that refine uses because it works exactly the same. So here we're going to see this. One nice thing that Refine is doing that Workbench doesn't seem to do is I can actually pick the new cell value here, so that's nice. and I can merge selected and recluster, and I can just keep changing these until I am happy with merge selected. Okay. Keep merging these until I'm happy with my my cleaning. And let's see. That is basically it. The other thing that you might want to do is, say I have NA here. I don't know how many NAs I have in my data set, but let's say I want to change NA to a 0. We wouldn't want to do that, but there are times when we might want to. So if I do apply to all identical cells, it will now change all of those in my sheet. So it's similar to find and replace. We actually didn't look at that in Workbench, but it's just a step called find and replace, and it's very self-explanatory. So that's the basics of cleaning data. You want to make sure you always save your original data, save your clean data, and then you'll be working on your cleaned data going forward. In Refine, I guess is one last thing. Once I've cleaned this, I would then want to export a CSV file or another file. And one thing to know there is, let's say I had faceted this by state and then said, okay, only show me properties that are owned by someone in California. If I export now, it's exporting these 17 matching rows. So you just need to be aware of that. And if I delete that, I would now be exporting my entire data set.